Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. We'll call the workshop session to order. First item on the agenda is discussion regarding water and electric rates.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. At your dais, you have about 3 or 4 pages worth of slides that I'll be referring to. Unfortunately, couldn't get on the screen for the audience. You should also have some large tabloid-size spreadsheets that I'll refer to later in the presentation. We wanted to review with you some of the items, and some of these were referenced in the FY22 finance report. But we did want to, based on council input, start some discussion related to what we're seeing, not only in the electric, but also water wholesale rates and some of the impacts, external impacts to those rates that council may want to take into account at a future meeting. The second slide is the discussion items. So what we want to do is we want to take a look and update some trends and impacts to our wholesale costs, both water and electric. I want to make it clear that we are not advocating at this point to change rates. However, please understand that there are some external impacts to our wholesale rates that may want council to discuss that in the future meeting, or you may want to direct staff to do some further investigation or gather further information on it. And I think as we discussed in the FY22 finance report, the city had the ability last year to absorb some of these increases. These increases didn't just happen yesterday. If you'll take a look at kind of what we've been reviewing in terms of a 28-month trend, particularly on electric ERCOT market costs, as well as water costs, these are items that we have been talking about for some time. We have been able to absorb that because we had a hot, dry summer last year primarily. We also had some growth in terms of new meters and new consumption, but I think a lot of it was driven by the weather we had, not only in the summer, but as we've also discussed previously, we have a peak in the wintertime as well. Our water rates, our water sales were up about 4.1% last year. Electric was up about 6.9%, so that served as somewhat of a shock absorber to those increased wholesale rates. And I want to make also clear that this is a conversation that's going on in just about every retail provider's boardroom, commission, council chamber, board of directors, in talking to my peers from large and my Pertinalis Electric Co-op to small, everybody's talking about, you know, the need to examine these wholesale costs. We've seen things happen over the last year where, for example, Pertinalis has raised about 0.8 of a penny on their electric rate. You probably read Austin Energy is looking at a double-digit increase. And again, we're not suggesting that. The message is just simply that this is a conversation that's going on all over the state of Texas. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about water. The primary drivers, as we have noted to council in the past, has been the increase in our account line cost of water and our account line water rights. And just for reference, last year we were about $420,000 overspent from plan in those lines, and that was due primarily to increases in our Brazos River Authority contracts, as well as the cost of treated water, and that's water that's coming down the pipe to us from Central Texas, as well as delivered through Kentner Water Supply Corp. Chemicals, operating supplies, labor has all gone up, and so we've seen that in that line item as well. We did talk in the FY22 budget process about the need, and I think council made a reasonable decision to take a look, do an interim step, and then maybe take another step this coming year if needed. So that's something that we did talk about in the FY23 budget process. October 1, we did increase those rates 10 cents per 1,000 gallons and $2.25 for a readiness to serve charge, and that readiness to serve charge is the amount you pay regardless of if you use a drop of water. It's a base rate that you pay that is typical for the utility industry. We'll look at some impacts of that potential increase in a future slide. The next slide deals with electric. And when we talk about electric rates, we're talking about, and actually it can be broken down into probably 20 different segments of wholesale costs. But the two primary costs that we look at is the cost of energy, which are wholesale contracts for, we buy X number of kilowatts and we pay X number of dollars per kilowatt. The other part of our electric bill, our wholesale bill, is the ERCOT side of it, the market costs. So, particularly after Winter Storm Uri, when we started talking to you about reliability and the cost of reliability, that cost is borne by the market. We are part of that market. So if we want generation here when demand is here, you've got to pay, the market has to pay for that responsive reserve or spinning reserve. We've also seen some things within the electric industry that's impacted the costs in terms of the management of the grid. So a lot of times generators had some slight advantage in that they could generate more when the market was higher, when the demand was higher, when the need was greater for that reliability factor. Now, because sometimes that is so great, it almost works in reverse. The market comes down when demand goes up because there's so much reserve that they have to account on. So it's been more challenging in terms of that. The 28-month trend, and again, I know we're just talking about a sliver of a penny, but it does have an impact that we'll go over. The 28-month trend indicates about almost half a penny in cost increase per kilowatt hour. So 45/100ths of a penny is what we're seeing in terms of the trend in increases over the last 28 months. The base wholesale, and remember that's just the market end of it. If we take a look at our cost per energy, again, that's also dealing with increases in fuel, operating and maintenance costs, interest expense, because interest rates have gone up, and so that is going to have an impact on part of that wholesale rate. We're looking at close to another half a penny increase on that side, so not quite a full penny is what we're seeing the trend in terms of our wholesale costs. And again, we'll go over that in a little more relative comparison here in the next slide or two. One of the other things that Council asked us to do is brush off the sheet that we typically do once a year once we start or get into our budget season. That's a kind of a comparison and seeing how we do compared to other entities. And there are a couple of things, and when we get there, you've got a tabloid size sheet at your dais. It should be folded a couple of times that will reference those items. And a couple of disclaimers. Rates are relative to city's pricing. In other words, the methodology they use to price, for example, electricity. Your cost philosophy, okay? We've seen, and you can see hopefully the picture that's painted by this spreadsheet is some communities will bear more of that income on commercial. Some communities will bear more of that income on residential compared to. So they have a pricing philosophy that will charge more for one rate class and less for another. We also talk about debt service, and particularly that's related to water. Right? The person with the highest water rate probably has the newest water plant. Make a big purchase, a big piece of infrastructure, that is typically the big swinger in the cost of particularly water. The other thing that I would reference, I know I tell you this every year when we look at it, is different communities have obviously the same revenue streams, but they can count on different revenue streams to offset other revenue streams. So for example, the city of Lampasas at the time that this was published had about a 33-cent mill levy. We're not the lowest. We're not the lowest property tax rate, but compared to Fredericksburg, who had a 20-cent property tax rate, their per capita property tax valuation was $190,000 compared to our $58,000. So, and obviously the same thing can be said on sales tax. You know, our 1.7 at the time of publication, 1.7 million per year, you know, fails in comparison to, for example, Kerrville at 8.4 million, Fredericksburg at 5 million, and Marble Falls at 7.8 million. So some of those rates are also impacted by the ability of the community to reap or capitalize on other revenue streams. And then also just to remind you that the pricing methodology, and I know this is like, and I apologize, it's a little tedious, but there are two basic pricing ways to price electricity. One is the way we do it. You buy X number of kilowatts, you pay X number of pennies for those kilowatts. The other way that some communities do it is they take your monthly bill, the dollar amount of your monthly bill, and divide that into the amount of kilowatts that are sold. Some months, for example, we may buy 80% of what we sell. Some months we may buy 110% of what we sell. But in that case, in that pricing model, the burden is really on the customer for dealing with those big variations in pricing. And then they typically have a standard distribution rate that covers their internal distribution. The reason I'm telling you this is because when we say a 28-month trend of upward costs in terms of wholesale, those are being passed on in those pricing models, passed on month in, month out to the customer. So even though they say they may not have raised prices, they're passing through all of those prices to the citizen or to the business. Our last water increase was in October 2022. Last electric was in November 21. Before that, it was in October, I believe, of 2017. So let's just take a look at the big sheet. And again, this is something council, again, take it with a grain of salt. But you can see the yellow indicates those communities that are more than the city of Lampasas. And you can see that generally we compare fairly well, particularly on the commercial side and even in some on the residential side. Obviously, you can see where maybe Kerrville is lower, but they also have a much better ability, you know, their sales tax or property tax is much higher as well. Yes.
I hate to interrupt, but I'm just curious, because you said there are the two different models. Do we know what model each city uses?
Yes, if you will refer to the spreadsheet that you have, those communities along the top banner of communities with the asterisk, those are communities that utilize that methodology. And then there's an explanation of it down at the bottom of that spreadsheet. The other thing that's important, since you brought it up, the other thing that's important to mention is, just like in water pipes, we have line loss. It's either unaccounted use or we actually lose electrons in our system. That's just the nature of having a distribution system of any kind. In that pricing model, all of that line loss is borne by all the customers. You spread out typically it's a 7 to 12% line loss out within those dollars that you divide up and divide into the kilowatts you sold. So again, we provide that to council for some perspective. I think this was a request, and I think for the value that our citizens receive, I think this is not a terrible pricing comparison. I think it puts Lampasas in a good light. We also wanted to talk about rate comparisons. Typically, we talk about a bond usually carves out about 7 to 8 accounts that represent a cross-section of our users, not only business, but also residential rates. And we also have inside the city and outside of the city, because we have a rural rate and a in the city limits rate. The other thing to just keep in mind too is that, and this is something that council may or may not want to consider, but typically if you do a meter increase, the readiness to serve increase, you impact 100% of the users. If you do a per unit increase, 10 cents a 1,000 gallons, half a penny on your electric side, there is at least some control perhaps by the end user in terms of their own personal conservation that they may or may not be able to offset some of that increase. It's still an increase, don't get me wrong, but it's perhaps just a way of thinking about it. And I want to remind council again that we will only prepare or modify the ordinance at the discretion and direction of council to include the timing of implementation. I'll refer to the next sheet that you should have at your desk, which is electric. And again, we just wanted to provide council some examples of different residential rate impacts, family of four, single person, family of six outside of the city limits, elderly couple. These are all based on February 2023, and that is not by any means a bridge month. That is one of our peak months for the winter. It's not as much of a peak as it is in the summer, but with electric heat and the winters we've been having, it does have an impact. And that's frankly when the grid has had the most problems, when they've had these huge peaks during the winter. It's not, they're always prepared during the summer, but Uri was in the winter. I think the event in 2015 was a winter event. So those happen. You can see that we've got three basic columns there. One is a 0.2 of a penny increase. The middle column is a half a penny increase per kilowatt hour, and then the far right on your spreadsheet is 0.7 of a penny. And I remind you that when we started talking about the very first or second slide, we're seeing increases in wholesale costs close to a penny, not quite about 9/10 of a penny increase on the wholesale side. So you can see anywhere from a range from in February, $17.26 increase for the family of four, to the elderly couple inside, $2.71 per month. And by the way, since this was kind of a peak, I did the math on the family of four inside, the first example on the 7/10. If you take the 191, which is their annualized increase, and of course, this is obviously a home with some with electric heat. They're using 2,400 kilowatts in the month of February. That 191 averages out to about $16 a month increase if you did go up to 7/10. Any questions on that? The next slide, actually, and I apologize, I thought this would be big enough on the screen that you could read it. Since it's not on the screen, I'm going to have to refer to this is water. And you have two blocks on your slides. One is residential to the left and then commercial to the right. And again, we started with a what if of $2 increase in base and then a 10 cent per 1,000 gallons increase. And you can see the difference on the residential side. Family four inside, and again, this was June, which is fairly typically a high water usage month. The increase impact would be about $2.55. The annualized increase for the previous 12 months would be about $23.51. So fairly nominal on the water side. On the commercial side, and again, I'm sorry I didn't get those headings transferred over. But they're the same headings: consumption, current rate, proposed rate, and impact. So if you look at the very far right column, you can see that commercial that used about 9,300 gallons per month. That would go up about $2.93. Over the course of their previous 12 months, that would have been about a $32.57 increase. And again, you can kind of go down there and take a look at whatever example you'd like. I think it's certainly our hope that this gives you some perspective on what the dollars would be out of the pocket of either a business or resident. The very last slide, again, I can't emphasize this enough, but we would like your input, further direction on any additional study, any information that you would need, and if you would like something like this to be placed on future agenda. I think the impacts are, I think we want to walk in with our eyes open. I think we try to communicate what the external impacts to our pricing is, and then how do we either make sure we've got a good shock absorber, or do we need to do something to raise? I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does council at this point have any suggestions, or do you want to take a comment?
Like that,
You got it.
fuel rates probably drop about 25 to 30%. Does that have any impact on electricity from a generation standpoint?
I'm sorry, the question.
Fuel price per barrel of oil has gone from about $120, and I think today it's about $69 a barrel. Does that have any impact on the generation?
Some, but we're also dealing with coal in some cases, natural gas primarily, and then it's transporting that coal and the natural gas market. And somebody smarter than me can better explain it, but we saw an unusual period of time where gas was, $3 an MMBTU, and just day in, day out, very, very steady. And now we're seeing some volatility. So yes, diesel's come down, but some of that volatility still exists in the market. And the other thing that compounds that is if for example, you've got 3 or 4 days of hard freeze, and you go out and you hedge gas, you're paying a little bit more because you want to be available to make money to generate. And then if the market creates such a cushion that it keeps the market electric rates down, then you can't take advantage of that situation as well. So I think there's a lot of challenges in working with this market as opposed to the very consistent fuel prices we had for a number of years.
Can you remind us again, during the storm of Uri, the city paid X amount of dollars during that, and then pass that along to citizens? Is that
correct? Correct. And again,
But could you mention the dollar amount?
it was about 1.5 million. And so the city has very strong PPAs, purchase power agreements. They're load following, so we use a kilowatt, we buy a kilowatt. Those types of agreements are not going to be available, at least on the third party market. But yes, and so our energy price stayed the same, but what we were hit with was getting the energy from one load zone to another, congestion, ancillary costs, all of the market rates is what drove that increase up. We still bought kilowatts for the same price. It's just the market side of it was just way out of whack.
Any other comments or questions? And we would just ask you to bring this back to the future day.
But thank you. And please let me know if you have any questions in the meantime.
Thanks, Em. Next item is discussion regarding staffing for the pool season.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sorry, Chris wasn't able to make it this evening, so you'll stuck with me.
Happy to see you.
So we have put this item on the agenda. As of today, we have 2 applications for cashier and received 1 application for lifeguard. And it takes anywhere, we need at least 28 employees to run both pools. So We start at $8.25 for our lifeguards and cashiers. So we are here to present, requesting y'all's guidance and input as to recommendations as to what y'all think we ought to do.
Have you quizzed anyone as to why they're not?
Yes, ma'am. So I did attend the talk fair at the high school. I thought we had drawn up some interest there. We had some kids fill out applications there, and said they were going to bring them back to us. Problem up at City Hall, and they have not turned them in yet. So from what Julie Salato mentioned, I think everybody's kind of in the same boat. There's a lot of places that are just struggling with competitive wages. So
what would be a competitive wage in your mind for these lifeguards?
most, we have compared with some surrounding cities, and it ranges anywhere from $8.25 to $14 for lifeguards. So kind of our midpoint would be between 11 and 12.
How many lifeguards are those 28 employees? They're not all.
Last year we had 18 of those were lifeguards.
And do you honestly feel that if you had the budget to go up, that you'd get more applications?
We do, yes. If we increase their wages, I think we would see some more interest.
So do y'all pay lifeguards the same thing that you pay the cashiers?
Typically, yes. The starting pay is the same. If they're returning, we do have an incentive for them. They get an automatic 25-cent an hour increase.
Well, I feel it's a pretty vital function to have both pools open. How do you guys feel?
I agree.
I agree. And can we pay for this? Where can we pay for this? What are our options? Because I think we need to.
I think the overall impact, yes, there is some impact to increasing the salary line, but I think the risk or the exposure of not doing it is too great. I think we'll have to find money wherever we can. We have not identified a line item that we can pull the excess funds from, but at the same time, I think I would agree with the sentiment of council that we got to do everything we can to keep our pools open. That's too big of too important of a resource for our community.
And these are non-benefit jobs, so it's just a flat
Correct.
salary.
Just part-time, exam benefits. And as of today, we still do not have application for pool manager or assistant pool managers either, so.
How are we advertising for these positions besides the city job fair?
So we post it on the city website, we push it out in the newspaper, and also at the job fair as well.
So if you can come up with a better wage and start posting it again, what's the cutoff time that you need these anymore?
They're open till filled, but pool seasons would be just right around the corner, so we do typically open Memorial Day weekend.
Is there any way to reach out to the managers that have worked every summer for the last few summers? Is there any way to reach out to them and check with them and see why they haven't applied, or explain to them why they have to apply again every year?
So we have not reached out to those. We've posted it. We advertise. They do typically know when we post. They watch it. So, but we have not reached out to them.
Do we need to suggest a rate, or you guys gonna come up with a good rate?
If council doesn't mind, I think staff can probably put together a rate. However, we're going to push it to whatever we need to. I mean, obviously not going to be 18 or 20 bucks an hour, but we are going to push that probably 13, 14, whatever.
And what are we competing against when it comes to fast food, things like, what are their hourly, 13, 14?
I've heard they're paying up to 15, some places are paying up to 15 an hour. So.
And I think that if you're gonna get the young, if you're gonna get those high school kids in there to work, and those are the ones that do need to work, most of them are gonna want a long-term job, but if you're trying to dangle like a part-time job where they can work in the summer but not have to work during the school year, I think you're gonna have to be competitive with those fast food restaurants and stuff that they can get a job at real easily.
Is that all you need for classification?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
We'll proceed.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next item is discussion regarding any other item on the regular agenda. Does anyone want to discuss any item on the agenda?
Is there anybody, I think, I know
Yes,
there's
I
some
would
people
like to
that.
talk about the pool still. Can I come up?
No, well, we're going to have citizens comments later.
Oh,
I would appreciate it then. At that point, we can adjourn the workshop and go into, 10-minute break. 5-minute break.
I make a motion to adjourn.
We're still asking for 10 minutes, so we're adjourning for 10 and we're seconding for 10. All those in favor?
Right.